I got a few tips for you on how to make these pancake style air compressors a lot more useful for not a lot more money. I'm going to split this up into a few separate shorter videos because these tips really aren't dependent on each other, and I'll make it easier to sift through the content. The first one is that these guys are very easy to convert into auxiliary air tanks. Now what do I mean by that? Well, this, is an air compressor on its own, but it's a very small and weak one, so it really can't power bigger tools like air hammers and plasma cutters and that kind of stuff. So for those bigger tools, I have a 220 volt shop compressor, but I don't want to leave the shop compressor in my shop for a few reasons. Firstly, this shop is very small and packed with garbage as it is. There's not a lot of floor space in here. Secondly, that shop compressor is fucking loud, and I value my hearing. Third one is that having it up here in the shop, it would be sucking in dirty, dusty shop air, which simply isn't good for the compressor in the long run. So instead, I keep it downstairs in the laundry room where it's plugged in the dryer outlet, and then I have a hose running out the laundry room, through the gym, up the stairs, through the den, and right here in the shop where it comes up to the workbench. Where'd it go? There it is. Where the hose comes up to the workbench, and I can plug it in to a few extra fittings I put here on the compressor. And that will let me charge it up. One sec. There we go. Easy. And I can just leave this guy plugged in here, and then that, I don't know if you can hear the big compressor kicking on downstairs now. But yeah, that will run and keep this guy pumped up. And in fact, I don't even run this smaller compressor on its own practically at all anymore because it's so much faster to charge it off of the big compressor. But if I need to, I can still plug it in and run it that way. There's a couple other benefits of this too, and that this acts as a like another water separation tank, right? So when you have moisture in your lines and that gets pumped up through the hose here, it condenses, and then the droplets will form in the tank as opposed to in your tools. And then it also acts as a pressure buffer so that no matter how much hose you have running up to this auxiliary tank, the tools that you have plugged in the tank really don't see it, right? Because this mass of air here keeps the pressure from dropping too much too fast. So there's one time I had to pump a hole in the curb to run a drain hose out to the street, and I had maybe 150 feet of hose between my shop compressor and this auxiliary tank, and then I had my air hammer after that, and it worked fine. Usually after that much hose, you'd have a pretty big pressure drop, and the tool wouldn't run for shit. But this worked great. Now the steps for this are pretty simple. It might vary from make and model of compressor, but this Porter cable one is very common. So if you have a pancake compressor, it's probably the one you got, and anything else should still be similar enough. So for this guy, you pull off the plastic shroud, which has one torque screw holding it on here, and then you have the regulator manifold that used to have this safety valve plugged in right here. I will point out, before you do any work on this stuff here, be sure you drain the tank, okay? If you don't do that, when you undo one of these fittings, it's going to come flying out of there with a lot of pressure behind it and make, at the very least, a very loud, gust of air that, again, is going to mess with your hearing. So drain the tank before you do any work. Now for this guy, I pulled the safety valve off, added a 2-inch nipple here, and this is all 1/4-inch NPT. If you're not aware of this 1/4-inch NPT, it's the one that measures about 1/2 inch because of weird plumbing nomenclature. But it's a very common size for pneumatic fittings. So 2-inch nipple, then a T, then a check valve, and a male fitting here. And then the T lets you put the safety back on. Do be sure you put the safety back on, otherwise you do run the risk of one day overcharging your tank and having it explode on you. And again, that's not good. But wherever the safety used to be plugged in, just a few more fittings and you're set. Now you can use a ball valve here rather than a check valve if you want to, but then you got to futz with switching it back and forth. And one day if you're carrying the tank around like this and you bump the ball valve, again all the air will come rushing out, and it's better to spend $5 and get a dedicated check valve. And in total here you've got maybe $10 or $11 in parts. It's really not much at all, and it basically lets you get the full power of your shop compressor wherever you can bring this smaller compressor. Well, it still remains a useful small compressor. Now the only thing about that is you are still limited by this manifold here and the small pipe sizes on that, but we'll address that in the next video.